what were the things though that destroyed confidence? Because you've talked about this formula, but we need to understand what to understand how to recreate the formula again. One needs to understand confidence levels just don't lift magically by themselves. There's reasons why they rise and they fall. So what the rise? What caused the rise and what caused the fall of the confidence levels?
And, if you're an investor, you invest capital around the world. There are very few societies, let alone emerging markets, where the formula is absolutely I can remember a mining house put it really well to me long ago. They said, look, we invest in some wild places, if you think of where mining happens. And we're used to governments with counterproductive policies, and we're used to infrastructure that doesn't really work, and we're used to difficult tax regimes, and we're used to, miners will be used to low levels of civil conflict. They say we can deal with all those things if they manifest as one or two of those actions at the same time. So you don't need let's say a clinically perfect investor climate. But they said in your case, in SA, you're taxing capital on arrival. So if you wish to commit to the country and invest, we're going to tax the amount of investment you wish to commit at a rate that usually approaches 30%. So immediately you're not competitive. Then your infrastructure, electricity, rail, ports, is breaking down. Policy is completely unpredictable. If you take the case study of South Africa's mining legislation over the past 20 years, a constant shifting of the country's goalposts. The politics is completely volatile. It's very difficult to draw. Well, we think it's a bit easier than that, but in the view of this firm, very, very difficult to draw a long-term projection. And property rights are under threat. If you're a miner, a long-term greenfields investor, you might only see the return on what you're committing to a investment jurisdiction in 10 or 20 years' time. And the problem with South Africa was not so much that there were elements of bad policy, but that in each area of policy, each area of that, let's say there were tick boxes. You're an investor. You're going to tick boxes to invest somewhere. So there's civil strife and conflict. Well, we can deal with that. Or the property rights regime is unclear, or the tax regime is unfriendly, or whatever it is. The skills base isn't great. Or the railways, we're going to have to do something on our own to get the stuff out. In South Africa, every single one of those factors came together at once. How do you reverse it? You stop practically, we need more growth, which is a absolutely pointless and vacuous statement to make. Stop taxing capital on arrival. If you want to commit fixed capital to South Africa, you can do so without a tax being applied to it. That's number one. Number two is refit South Africa's defunct coal plants. At the moment, a peak hour of the peak day, South Africa produces about 25,000 megawatts of electricity. We estimate that in order for the South African economy to maintain a growth rate approaching 3 and then 4 and 5% through the next decade, we need to increase that 25,000 number to 40,000 megawatts. The good news, again, because that's so much the thing we're going to emphasize, and I can see we're going to be in for a big fight very often on stressing this progress and good news story about South Africa, not and in a serious way, but based on the facts of the case. South Africa has more than sufficient surplus grid capacity running from the north to the south of the country to carry that increased production. It has zero surplus grid capacity running from the west to the east of the country, where from the zones of higher solar radiation into where the cities and industry are. Also running north to south, South Africa has about 20,000 megawatts of defunct coal plants and equipment. And our own efforts of talking to engineers, including former and past at Eskom, many of whom wish to stay off the record because, amazingly, this is a controversial subject. So that defunct coal plant and equipment, even where it's 50 years old, if it's audited to determine what's missing or broken or rusted through, those parts are ordered, manufactured if they need to be, refitted, and those plants are lit up, they will work. And therefore, South Africa does in practice not have an energy cap on its growth rate if it uses the grid infrastructure and installed capacity that already exists within the country. That does not, the immediate counter to that we've received so often that we just don't even wait for the question is well, what about environmental issues? The fact of it is South Africa's environmental problem is 10 million unemployed people who live a terrible life of poverty and desperation. And that should be the country's national priority. That's the environmental concern. The second answer, once you've dealt with it's a moral issue beyond anything else, and you actually have absolutely no place if you're an external activist or diplomat coming to South Africa and telling South Africa's government and its people, no, you have to turn off or not turn on the power infrastructure you already have, because in our societies, part of our culture has become this issue of climate. The second point we make on the energy argument is that we're not having a fight about clean energy. Yeah. You can drive around in Mpumalanga, that's a sort of where a lot of South Africa's coal fields and coal plants are, and you can see that before you get to climate issues, it's toxic. Yeah. The coal burning, you can see that. But South Africa needs to be given a break here, that for the next decade, it's allowed to refit and use the defunct electricity infrastructure that already exists. Because that is the only way we're going to move from the 25,000 to the 40,000 megawatt peak daily production, which is the only way that you can actually then start to talk seriously about getting the economic growth rate up from sub 1% to 3 and 4 and then 5%. Thereafter, as those plants reach the end of their lives, there should be a transition to something cleaner. Now, that may be nuclear, and it may be green if storage technologies for green energy improve. So there's not in practice, let's say some European diplomat came here, and, as they are wont to do, lectured the South Africans that in practice it's better to have very high rates of desperate poverty than to turn on your coal plants. The South African answer should be actually as offensive as that is, which it is. We're not arguing that point. Yeah. We're saying it's a question of timing in our case, more so for the fact, which we'll still get to, that about a year ago, just more than that, South Africa did an amazing thing in that after 30 years of the African National Congress, which had been the party of Nelson Mandela, having a national political majority in South Africa, had lost that majority. And instead of throwing its lot in with the radical populists, which it might easily have done, it chose to do something else, which is to form a coalition government with an essentially centrist political party. That, if we do not burn the coal now, to get the growth rate up and therefore the jobs rate up and therefore start the cycle that we've set out for you before, there is a very real risk that that experiment will fail. Yeah. And if that experiment in democracy fails, we will get into what the consequences of that might be. They're not all dire for the wealthy and the middle classes. In fact, we think they're not. But if the point we'll make as we go on in this talk is if the South African democracy fails, the prospects of those desperately poor, unemployed people who've been left behind who still haven't been given avenues into a comfortable urban middle-class existence, they will be probably trapped in poverty permanently. So the unity government has to survive in order to liberate the last of the desperately poor from that desperation. For the unity government to survive, it needs to get get the jobs numbers up. To get the jobs numbers up, it needs to solve the energy problem. And there is, fortunately, there is a wonderful, easy, straightforward, cheap and cost-effective energy solution that just requires the South African government to move on it.